In this morning's Business Insight, local soccer fans were out in full force last week to celebrate the announcement that FC Cincinnati will become a Major League Soccer expansion franchise in 2019. People packed Rheingeist Brewery in Fountain Square, where it was simulcast, for a pep rally type announcement. It was a day many have been waiting for and may ultimately be remembered as the beginning of a bright and profitable future for professional soccer in Cincinnati. But as with any major announcement, it also starts the latest round of questions, analysis, and speculation. Business Courier reporters Chris Wetterick and Steve Watkins have been and will remain all over the story. They joined Business Watch producer Kelly Leon in the studio with their take on what's next.
Thanks, Peg. Thanks for being here, guys.
Sure.
So let's get into the first question of why? Why were we ultimately chosen? Why Cincinnati when it came right down to it?
Well, I asked Don Garber, the commissioner, that question, and he said the first thing out of his mouth was Carl Lindner. The ownership of this team, he added in Scott Farmer, the CEO of Cintas, but the ownership of this team really set them apart quite a bit. They're two of the wealthiest people and families in the city, for starters. They run highly successful, huge businesses. Carl Lindner has told me in the past his dad was good friends with Phil Anschutz. Phil Anschutz is a guy who is probably one of the two most influential people in starting MLS. At one point, he owned 5 franchises out of 10 in the league. So he's one of the most powerful people in the league. He still owns the LA Galaxy. So Phil Anschutz introduced Carl to Don Garber. So it pays to have connections, basically, in addition to having money. And when you've got those two things, you can solve a lot of other issues. On top of that, the attendance and fan support is just off the charts. They would rank, they're averaging about 24,000 fans this year. They would rank probably 6th or so in MLS if they were in the league right now. And then the stadium was the final piece. They nailed down the West End site. The league loves the West End site. I talked to Carl Lindner at the end of last week, a few days after the announcement. He said this is truly one of the few real urban sites within MLS. They're really fired up about it.
So, good transition to you, Chris. Talk about the West End site. We went through all of that, getting it. It appears we have it. Is it a done deal?
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and the reason is because the city has approved it, more or less. It has all of the approvals that it needs. There's probably some zoning things that will still need to be done. There is a potential referendum on some money that the city offered up. They'll have to gather the requisite 6,000 plus signatures to do that. That would only take money out of the project, though. It wouldn't deal with the location at all.
Okay.
But it remains to be seen whether those signatures are actually going to materialize here. But I think the site is a done deal.
I didn't see anyone from the West End as part of the announcement. That's just my personal
it's a great point.
observation.
I mean, there was a lot of division in the community about that, and really the only person from that wasn't from Major League Soccer who was on stage was Mayor Cranley. I'll tell you who I thought should have been on there was the Cincinnati School Board. They're the ones who basically gave up their field behind Taft High School. It was they probably more than any other organization in town had a lot to do with this, just because they had control over the site, and they were willing to negotiate and give it up for, in exchange for some significant benefits, including the team paying property taxes. So.
And talk a little bit about this particular sport coming to Cincinnati. What does Major League Soccer bring that the NFL doesn't bring, that Major League Baseball doesn't bring to Cincinnati?
There are a couple things. The biggest one, I think by far, is the international exposure, really both national and international, but the international part really sets it apart from any of our other Major League franchises. The MLS, I talked to Jeff Birding also last week, a couple days after the announcement. He said they broadcast games in 170 countries around the world. So you can't buy that kind of exposure.
Right.
And when you think about people seeing FC Cincinnati games on TV in other countries, seeing the excitement, enthusiasm that we have here, and they say, I'm a soccer fan, I live on a different continent maybe, and I see Cincinnati has soccer. Well, if Procter & Gamble or Kroger or whoever is recruiting these guys and women and trying to get them to move here, that's a pretty good lure, is to say, hey, we've got soccer. We have NFL and MLB too, but they may or may not know too much about that. The international exposure is pretty impressive, and it's a lot more national exposure too. The games are on ESPN, so you get the name out that way too. And you know, it gives sponsors more exposure, which I'm sure they will pay extra
And
for.
I'm sure City Hall's loving that aspect of it too.
They 5 of them do. 5 of 9.
Okay,
The
we
majority.
don't have enough time. I knew this was going to happen. Both of you have so much. I love all the insight, the stuff that you can't always give us in the paper and your stories, but I'm telling you, keep reading these guys because they are on top of this, and I'm sure you're going to continue to uncover many different angles moving
yes.
forward. Thanks so much, guys.